Will the New York Giants' progress made in year one of the Brian Dable era suffer if they lose Mike Kafka or Wink Martindale? That, plus what they could do if that happens, and answering a listener question coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Nissan. The only thing more exciting than the big game is the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. There's only a few days left until the Super Bowl. Are you ready? The Nissan Ariya, the EV for people who love to drive. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family. Your team every day. My name is Patricia Train. Happy Tuesday to everybody. Glad to have you with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast, whether you're listening to us on our audio platforms or watching on YouTube. And on today's show, folks, I'm going to have to address it. I didn't want to. I didn't think I would have to, but it's a possibility. What happens if the Giants lose Mike Kafka and or Wink Martindale, their offensive and defensive coordinators, respectively? And if that happens, what are the plans for the Giants so that they don't suffer, so that they don't, regress in the progress that they made in the first year under Brian Dable? So we're going to talk about that. Plus, I have a listener question that I'm going to answer in segment 3 of the podcast. Again, happy to have you with us. Let's get right to it. I'm going to start with Mike Kafka. For those not aware, the latest is that Mike Kafka is reportedly a finalist for the Arizona Cardinals head coaching vacancy. Now, there were originally 3 finalists reported by SI's Albert Breer. There was Lou Anarumo, who's the defensive coordinator for the Bengals. There was Brian Flores, who was a defensive assistant with the Steelers, and Kafka. And since that report came out, Flores accepted the defensive coordinator position with the Minnesota Vikings, which basically narrows the field down to Lou Anarumo and Kafka. So that being said, you have a defensive-minded coach and an offensive-minded coach. Generally speaking, the offensive-minded coach is usually favored, especially if this is a team, the Cardinals being a team that wants to get Kyler Murray, their quarterback, back on track once he is healthy to return. So anyway, do I think that Kafka is going to depart? I still have my doubts. Even though he is one of 2 finalists, I still have my doubts. And the reason for that is he's a first-year offensive coordinator. So I question the level of experience in being able to lead an entire team because, I look at the Giants and the way that they were set up. And although Kafka was the offensive coordinator, the play caller, the offensive system was pretty much driven, I think, by Brian Dable. That's not to say that Kafka didn't have a hand in it. He did. But if you look at most of what the Giants did on offense, you see a lot of stuff that, they ran in Buffalo under Dable. So that being said, if I'm a team looking for a head coach, I probably don't go with Kafka just yet. I probably wait till he has another year of experience because the Giants offense, albeit, improved from 2021, still not a top shelf offense. Now, part of that obviously was because of the talent or lack of talent that they had. Part of that was, it was a new system and everybody was kind of still thinking as opposed to playing faster. So year 2, you figure, you add a few more playmakers, you improve the interior of the offensive line. Year 2 should be better for the Giants offense. And look, Kafka, I know, wants to be a head coach someday. If I were him, I probably would return to the Giants for at least another year. And if he returns to the Giants, I would not be surprised if he gets a nice hefty raise, given what he did in 2022. Now, what happens if Kafka says, you know what, I'm ready, I want to take the job if it's offered to me, and just move on? Where did the Giants go from there? Do they risk regressing on offense? My answer is, I don't think they will. First off, for what they could do and what I think they would do is, assuming that Shea Tierney, who is currently the quarterback's coach, isn't hired by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who expressed an interest in him for their offensive coordinator position, I could see Shea Tierney being promoted to offensive coordinator, and Davis Webb, who looks to be transitioning from player to coach, maybe becoming the team's quarterback's coach, because Davis Webb just worked really well with Daniel Jones last year in that quarterback's room. And you want to have some consistency. So you want to have consistency and continuity in that quarterback room. So, when I spoke to Eli Manning a few shows ago and I asked him about that, he says it all depends on, who they bring in, who's sitting there in the quarterback rooms, who's in Daniel's ear. Well, to me, it would make sense to have Davis Webb as a coach, if that's what he's planning to do, in that quarterback's room with Daniel, so that you have some continuity left over from, the previous regime of Kafka. Now, here's the other thing the Giants could do. And this I don't recommend, I don't want to see happen, but I could see it happening. If Kafka moves on and Tierney gets promoted and Davis Webb gets the quarterback's coach position, you wonder, might Brian Daboll take over the play calling? Now, Daboll didn't do it last year, as we all know. He trusted Kafka to do it, who had never done it before. But might he, in the interest of keeping continuity, because, a lot of what Kafka did, Daboll signed off on. They work very closely, hand in hand. Might Daboll take that on? Now, again, I don't think that is the way they will go, but you can't rule it out, because Daboll has said in the past that he liked calling plays. And if he wanted to do it for a year, who was to stop him? It's his decision. Now, at the same time, the same way he gave Kafka the opportunity to earn the role of calling plays, I would think that if Tierney is the new offensive coordinator, he would get a similar opportunity throughout the spring and summer and preseason to show that he could call plays. So I would be curious to see how that works out. But I do think that, if Kafka moves on, it makes sense to promote from within. Now, if for some reason they don't take that route, again, the thing to remember is that most of the Giants offense, a good chunk of it, the principles are based on what Daboll ran up in Buffalo. So I would not be totally broken up if they promoted within. I would not be as devastated if they lost Kafka. Good guy, don't get me wrong, and I don't want him to leave, but I don't think it would be, so catastrophic if they lost him. So we'll see if Kafka gets that job. I'm sure the Cardinals want to make a decision sooner than later, especially with the combine coming up in a few weeks. You would want the head coach to start putting his staff together, I would think. So I would say a decision's probably coming sooner than later from the Arizona Cardinals, who have narrowed down their field, again, reportedly, to the two candidates. All right, up next, Wink Martindale. What would the Giants do if he left? How catastrophic would that be? And how could they replace him? That's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, playing daily fantasy based on player projections has never been easier when you visit prizepicks.com. Pick 2 to 6 players, and if they go on to score more or less than their PrizePicks projections, you win up to 25 times the amount of your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks is currently operational in over 30 states and in Canada, and they offer projections on every sport. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less, and PrizePicks offers safe and fast withdrawals. Download the PrizePicks app today or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. Hey, Giant fans, thanks so much for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen every day. Subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast and get daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories, including in-depth analysis on the biggest games with NFL key predictions every Friday. And on Monday, local insiders cover the weekend with game-to-game episodes. Locked On NFL available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traynor, your host, and we're talking what-if scenarios. What if Mike Kafka leaves? What if Wink Martindale leaves? Well, we've covered Kafka in the first segment. Now we're going to talk about Wink Martindale. And folks, if there is one coordinator I really, really don't want to see leave, it would be Wink. And again, this is not a slight against Kafka. This is not me showing favoritism towards Wink. Here's my thinking when I say this. When Wink Martindale was hired, Dable basically gave him the keys to the warehouse, if you will. Said, you build the defense, you run it as you see fit. Wink was involved, with the hiring of some of the defensive assistants that weren't retained. And Wink built a positionless defense that thrives on pressure. He was the one who, designed all these new looks. I mean, you could say these schemes allowed for Dexter Lawrence to just really have the type of year that he had, a career year. You could say that, Azeez Ojulari, when he was healthy, was very productive as a pass rusher. Kayvon Thibodeau was productive as a pass rusher, even though he didn't have the numbers. So the schemes, the pressures, all of that is on Wink. The positionless defense is on Wink. That's a matter of knowing what your guys can do, being able to recognize it, and going accordingly. So what happens if Wink, who is reportedly a finalist for the Indianapolis Colts job, the Colts about to, if they haven't already started, go through round 3 of their interviews. What happens if the Giants lose Wink? Is that going to be catastrophic? Let's just say it's going to be a little bit more painful if they lose Wink versus Kafka. And again, because, Wink put in this system, and now to replace him, potentially you could say, well, you promote Drew Wilkins, who's the outside linebackers coach and who has been with Wink for a number of years. But here's the problem, folks. What if Wink goes to Indianapolis and says to Drew Wilkins, come with me, you're going to be my defensive coordinator? Giants can't block that because it's a promotion. So the other option is defensive backs coach Jerome Henderson. Now, Jerome Henderson, for those who don't know, he is a former NFL defensive back. Very good coach. I mean, you look at what he has done since he's been here with the defensive backs and how he's been able to get them to pretty much play at a decent enough level. Certainly a guy who you could consider for defensive coordinator. But part of that Wink Martindale coaching tree, really just for a year, as far as I know. So how much would the defense change? I mean, this is the problem. It's like, if Martindale were to leave, how much would change, especially if Wilkinson went with him? So that would be my concern, is the continuity, which, I'm sure they would try to keep it in some way, shape, or form, especially after seeing what has worked and what hasn't worked. But remember, they're also going to add some more talent on the defensive side of the ball. They have to. Another cornerback is probably coming. Linebacker is probably getting revamped. They're probably going to add some more defensive interior depth. So another pass rusher could be coming. I mean, basically, the Giants defense needs help across the board. I think if it were me, I'd want somebody with the experience of putting that all together. Drew Wilkins, I mentioned him. If he were to stay behind, he at least has some of, he's been with Wink for a number of years, first with Baltimore and then now with the Giants. I would like to see him stay on. Now, I know he might not have the, experience per se, but he has the background to where I think, a promotion might work for him. As far as Jerome Henderson, I don't think that he would be a bad defensive coordinator. I just question whether he would run the same type of system that the Giants have run this past year. How much would it change under him? Now, folks, change can be good. Don't get me wrong. It can be good. I mean, we had change this year with how Wink brought pressure and how, he approached playing aggressively as opposed to how Patrick Graham did it. So there's definitely, you don't have to be totally afraid of change, but continuity, I think, is the big question here. And the Giants defense, while not necessarily a top 10 unit in any macro statistic, they made progress. They improved from a year ago. And they did this despite having some injury issues, despite having, subpar play from the linebackers. So I would not like to see that continuity interrupted. So do I think Wink's going to get the job out in Indianapolis? Hard to say, folks. You never know what the Colts are going to do. I mean, did anybody see Jeff Saturday getting the job when they fired Frank Reich? I know I didn't. I know a lot of people who covered the Colts didn't see that coming. So you never know what's going to happen. But I would say at this point, I would think Wink is going to be back. But that being said, if anybody's ready for a head coaching job, he's the one who's really ready. I mean, he's experienced. Remember, he interviewed for the Giants head coaching job prior to this last cycle when they hired Joe Judge. Wink would make a great head coach. No doubt about it. Just let's hope it's not this year, because that Giants defense, get a few more pieces in, have Wink work his magic, get that unit really up and running and purring like a fine oiled machine, and then see what happens. If something happens, there's always openings that develop. So who's to say Wink won't get something? So, all right. So coming up next, I'm going to answer a listener question. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, if you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories and sugar, then you got to try a Built Bar. What makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter, brownie, and coconut almond. These delicious protein bars taste like a candy bar, but without all the guilt. Most Built Bars have about 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And here's the best part, folks. Now you don't have to wait around to get a box delivered by Built.com. You can pop into your local Walmart or Sam's Club and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can thank me later. Try them out today. Built Bar, available at BuiltBar.com and at Sam's Club and Walmart. Hey, Giant fans, don't forget to check out the Locked On Giants podcast on Instagram. We have a new account, Locked On Giants. And also don't forget to check out me on Instagram at Patty Traina, PATTITRAINA. You'll find clips, audio clips of the shows. You'll find information cards, factoids, all kinds of cool things. Check us out today on Instagram. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I am your host, Patricia Traina, and we are now on to the listener mailbag segment. And really, I just have one question that was submitted since I last did a batch of questions for Giants Country on Saturday's mailbag. So if you sent me a question, check out the Giants Country mailbag that I did on Saturday. Chances are your question is in there. But this question I know isn't in there because I got it just before I started to record this podcast. This question is from Thomas C. And it's a very timely question, considering that this is probably one of the biggest, actually two of the biggest offseason storylines for the Giants. Thomas wants to know what I think the value of a contract would be for Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. Can the Giants sign both of them? And what would we be looking at? All right. Great question, Thomas, because I'm actually working on contract structures for Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. It's a lengthy process, so it's not something I could do in one sitting because you got to check numbers and stuff like that. But it's been a fun process, so hopefully I'll be able to do a show on that at some point. All right, let's start with Saquon. There was a report that the Giants offered him somewhere around $12.5 million. Now, I had heard that as well, for what it's worth. And there's also another report out there, and this one I haven't heard from a source if this is true or not, that Barkley's agent is looking to get him in the same neighborhood as Christian McCaffrey. I don't see that happening. I just don't see that happening. All right. McCaffrey is a better receiver. And while you could say that Barkley has, better rushing yardage than McCaffrey this past year, McCaffrey topped them in several other statistical areas. Now, there's a belief that a running back is only as good as his offensive line. I don't know if I necessarily prescribe to that because, I guess I could see why somebody would say that because there's also something like yards after contact and whatnot. But I don't think it's just a matter of, simply plugging and playing a guy in there. Barkley is a special talent. You can make a case that he is probably amongst the top 5 running backs in the NFL. For rushing, can you say that he's in the top 5 overall for rushing and receiving? I would not go there. I would say he's close, but I wouldn't quite put him there. Now, part of that is because of how he was deployed in the offense. If you look at how he was deployed in the offense this year, in the beginning of the year, they ran a lot of heavy personnel, a lot of 2 tight end sets. The offense was the running game. Then opponents figured out how to shut it down, and then the Giants kind of gravitated more towards the passing game. So you saw less heavy packages, more 11 personnel, and just a shift in philosophy. So that being said, if that's how the Giants are going to want to build their offense, and here's the thing, are they going to want to build that offense around Daniel Jones? If so, what do you think their needs are going to be? Their needs are going to be obviously better interior offensive linemen for the future and receivers and possibly another tight end. So you bring those types of players in, and Saquon can be a piece of the puzzle. Now, if you're looking to build the offense around Saquon, then it makes sense, to pay more money. I don't think that's what the Giants want to do. I think they want to build it around Daniel Jones. So Saquon, as good as he is, would be a supporting piece. And you do not pay a supporting piece $16 million for a running back. Maybe you pay that for a receiver, a bona fide number 1 receiver, not for a running back. No. So what do I see Saquon getting? I have him on a 4-year deal, $13 million APY. I would not go higher than 13. I would not pay him Zeke Elliott money. Zeke is getting 15 million as of this recording. He might see that number slash, but it's 15 million. The 13 million would put him just above Derrick Henry, who has won the league rushing title 2 years in a row. Not this year. I think it was 20 and 21. He won the rushing title. So I would not pay Saquon Barkley that much more than a Derrick Henry. That's just me. And here's the other thing. Barkley is 26 years old. So if you give him a 4-year deal, that'll take him to about age 30. You take the 4-year deal and maybe get out of it after 2 years. If he declines, and to me, he doesn't quite have the same pop that he had before his injuries. Just a little bit off his fastball. You'd want to be able to get out of that deal if you need to after 2 years. So I would do 4 years, no more than 13 million. Probably throw some incentives in there to make that 13 million happen, but that's about as high as I would go. And if his side is going to insist on being paid more, I'd say, nice knowing you. I mean, I don't want to see that happen, but I don't want to see the Giants overspend for a running back when they have other needs that they're going to need to address. And plus, again, is the running back going to be the central part of the offense, or is it going to be the quarterback? I think it's the quarterback. All right. Speaking of the quarterback, what is Daniel Jones's value? What do I have him as? Now, I initially was of the opinion you do a short-term deal, like a 3-year deal with the option to get out after 2. And you structure it in such a way so that if Daniel outplays the deal after 2 years, you rip up the 3rd year and you give him another deal that matches the current market value. That seems fair to me. But having thought about it and having started to put together a structure, what I would consider doing, 5-year deal, at least 32 million a year. 32 million is the franchise tag for a quarterback. I would not go lower. I would say 32 million with the chance to maybe grow that to as much as 35 million. That's about as high as I would go with Daniel. Now, I would also structure the deal in such a way that you can get out of it after 3 years. So it kind of aligns with what I initially was thinking of doing had I been the one putting together the contract, which is to get out after 2 years. In this case, I'm just adding on another year. The hope is that Daniel will continue to develop in this offense. And I think he will, because again, Dable is kind of the constant factor as far as how the system is set up. So if you're Daniel Jones, the benefit to taking a 5-year deal at about 32 mil APY is you have, first of all, you have, security for the next several years. You have the knowledge of knowing that if you outplay the deal after the guaranteed money is all sapped up in the first 3 years of the deal, you can renegotiate and get a better deal, that's more aligned to the market. So if you're the Giants, the benefit is you can cut your losses after 3 years and you don't have to worry about quarterback. So I'm curious to see what they do with Daniel Jones. Now, I am working on, like I said, a structure for him for 5 years. And a couple of the contracts that I've been looking at to get ideas for how they might structure the contract include Josh Allen's contract of the Buffalo Bills, Jared Goff's, and Kirk Cousins. I've been looking at their APY. I've also taken a look at Derek Carr's and Ryan Tannehill's. And for good measure, I went back and I looked at Eli Manning's contract, not so much for money, but in terms of incentives and how those were set up. And I do believe there are ways that the Giants, through incentives like workout bonuses and, likely to be earned incentives and not likely to be earned incentives, that they can boost the value APY upwards, leaving it up to Daniel to basically compete and challenge himself. So again, to recap for Daniel Jones, 5 years, 32 million per year. Now, what I haven't talked about with Saquon and Daniel, and I will at some point, guaranteed money. What percentage of the contract would I guarantee? That's when I have the contract, kind of a structure. So once I'm able to put that together, I can give you that information as far as how I would guarantee it. But I would say certainly with both of them, you'd want to guarantee at least 60% of the contract. But again, I have to play with the numbers and just see how it works out. But you wouldn't want to go anything less than 50, I think. So, all right, folks, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. I want to thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Before I say goodbye, I just want to give you a quick update that there's not going to be a Locked On Giants live this week. Ooh, I know. But after the Super Bowl, I am hoping to get back with Entertainer and Bad Dog and do another Locked On Giants live, which focuses on the salary cap. I know you guys have been asking me about the salary cap show. That's something I want to do, after the Super Bowl when things calm down a little bit. So that is coming. Just want to put that out there. Keep an eye on the YouTube channel, because when I have a date and a time, you'll see the posting. That's something that hopefully you'll want to attend live, because I should have like graphics and stuff like that I could put on the screen to illustrate points. So, all right, folks, that'll do it for me. Until tomorrow, have a great one.